Hello everybody, my name is Daulton Nelson, and today I'd like to talk about a game I just beat, that game being Serious Sam 4 for the PC. Serious Sam 4 is a first-person shooter developed by Crow Team and published by Devolver Digital. About 3 to 4 years ago, I discovered the Serious Sam franchise and fell in love with it. Serious Sam HD, the first encounter, is a near-perfect experience for me in terms of an action-packed, horde-based first-person shooter. And Serious Sam HD, the second encounter, is a near-close experience to its predecessor. Serious Sam 3 BFE, however, was a bit of a letdown, as it saw the franchise try to slant more towards the contemporary trends of the time, but I have since come to appreciate it more on further playthroughs, and Serious Sam 2, which I played for the first time a couple years ago, while still my least favorite game of the franchise, had very interesting ideas, which saw Crow Team embrace their more cartoony side. At the end of my Serious Sam 2 review, I hinted at how Serious Sam 4 here looked like it was going to incorporate elements of all the Serious Sam games thus far, which was quite an eye-opener for me, as I realized that I've known about Serious Sam 4 being in development for at least since I first discovered the franchise. Furthermore, a glance at the series' timeline shows that it's been a little less than 9 years since the previous game in the franchise came out, Serious Sam 3. It's been a good while since the white t-shirt wearing, one-lining alien slaughterer has seen the light of day through a traditional video game release. But series developer Crow Team have not spent that time quietly. In the span of time between Serious Sam 3 and now, Crow Team released the brilliant Talos Principle, created the next iteration of their Serious engine, helped independent studios release spin-offs of the Serious Sam property, and actually released a VR version of Serious Sam themselves, with Serious Sam VR, The Last Hope. However, that span of time also saw first-person shooters evolve through things like VR, or more complex game design trends, or just different game design trends in general. Heck, old-school first-person shooter franchises in general are on the uptick recently, like Turok, Blood, Quake, Shadow Warrior, Wolfenstein, and most famously, Doom. Plus, Serious Sam didn't exactly leave players off on a good note with its more recent installments, so while I was excited about what Serious Sam 4 could be, I was also a little worried. The trailers and rollout for the game didn't help, as most of the trailers played coy and didn't show much. The lines in these trailers seemed to recycle lines from previous games, or use music from the previous games. They weren't very emblematic of a fresh or new experience for Serious Sam. Plus, the development did take its time. I started to wonder if this game would actually even come out. I even remember that Serious Sam 4 was supposed to be at E3 one year, but was then absent, relegated to a closed press junket, which revealed the Legion system behind closed doors. So, with all this in mind, all I could do was hope that Serious Sam 4 would be as good as I wanted it to be. Well, I can happily say that not only did Serious Sam 4 live up to my expectations, but there were points where Crow Team just kept surprising me with quality. Serious Sam 4 is the return to form the series desperately needed after BFE, while also being a great evolution on what the franchise does best. Seriously, I was having so much fun with this title from beginning to end. This is exactly what I was hoping for from Crow Team. However, Serious Sam 4 is not flawless. I think it has a lot of problems that keep it from becoming great. So, with that, let's start with the good. Naturally, Serious Sam 4 has the fantastic one-against-many fights the series is known for, with some great gunplay. But what Crow Team adds to this familiar gameplay makes it so much more in my opinion. For one, the speed of Serious Sam 4 feels so much faster than its predecessor. Both Sam and his adversaries glide around the game's environments alarmingly quick. It was giving me some Half-Life 1 flashbacks. Predictably, the weapons you have grown to love from the franchise make a comeback. The double shotgun, rocket launcher, minigun. Crow Team even brings the sniper rifle and laser gun back into the regular rotation. Though, they seem to have added a whiny sound whenever you fire the laser gun for a period of time, which annoys me to no end. Of course, in addition to the familiar roster of firearms, is the new weaponry you get to play around with, like an auto shotgun, and even a rocket-propelled flaming chainsaw launcher with lock-on capabilities. Yeah, really. Serious Sam 4 also adds new functions onto its already existing weaponry, like grenades onto the shotgun, a high damaging death ray for the laser gun, and lock-on burst rocket fire for the rocket launcher. And these aren't just small upgrades, which you get relatively low ammo for, nor is it something you're just going to put into the background. No. Once you get them, they're very much part of Serious Sam 4's regular arsenal. And if that wasn't enough firepower for you, Serious Sam 4 also adds gadgets into the mix. Gadgets are kind of like sub-items you can use to help get yourself out of a jam, or use like the power-ups from the second encounter. You get things like an attack drone, a black hole bomb, an exploding hologram, and even a miniature tactical nuke. At first, I was a bit taken aback by these, as they are so helpful, it almost feels like cheating. But as I kept playing Serious Sam 4, I found myself using gadgets more and more, so I think they're a welcome addition to the franchise, and will serve to help players get through some of their most tense and challenging moments in the game. Dual wielding isn't a feature new to the Serious Sam franchise, as Serious Sam's TFE, TSE, and 2 all had some kind of dual wielding, but 4 does bring some new twists to it by first making every weapon in the game dual wieldable after certain requirements are met. Then, unlike previous games where both weapons are shot with one mouse click, instead, each weapon in 4 takes up each side of the mouse, which I think is a great design decision on Crow Team's part, especially for weapons like shotguns, where having each gun in each hand mapped to a different button can make for a great way to enforce some crowd control on enemies who like to rush Sam. I also like the choice to take down the accuracy of weapons while dual wielding, as it creates a satisfying risk-reward trade-off that motivates the player to use both regular wielding and dual wielding in particular situations. Another addition I like to the gunplay in Serious Sam 4 is the very Doom 2016-esque weapon wheel that is incorporated here. Of course, Doom 2016 didn't invent weapon wheels, but it did slow everything down while you were in one, and Serious Sam 4's weapon wheel works identically to that, which I think is a welcome update to weapon selection for the series in general, especially since before it was double pressing hotkeys or using your mouse wheel. By comparison, Serious Sam 4's weapon wheel feels much more fluid and natural. One facet of Serious Sam 4's shooting I could have done without, however, is the reloading. Reloading, which was first introduced back in BFE, has never been a popular aspect to modern Serious Sam gameplay, so why it makes a return in 4 is beyond me, especially since Crow Team doesn't really give a good reason for its existence through gameplay. Reloading could be cut from 4, and I don't think I would miss it a bit, but there is an interesting ability you can get when you reload in Serious Sam 4 after certain conditions. Conditions I hinted at when talking about the dual wielding. Specifically, what I'm referring to here are the skill points and progression tree. Something new to Serious Sam, but not for contemporary first-person shooters. In fact, I can see these items being divisive amongst Serious Sam fans, who might see these things as Crow Team trying to appeal to a more modern audience. Personally, I don't hate the idea of skill points and a progression tree in Serious Sam. Some of the abilities you can get from this are quite useful, but there are other abilities that don't interest me in the slightest, especially the ones centered around melee attacks, which are a BFE addition that also returns to Serious Sam 4, and something which I also think should have been cut entirely. Plus, I'm not very fond of how you acquire skill points in this game, as you just seem to find random chests scattered throughout 4's levels that give you the points. I would have rather liked the points to be rewarded based on skill, or completing in-game challenges, which I know is rich coming from me, who lambasted Doom 2016 for doing what I'm suggesting here. However, I don't dislike Doom 2016's skill challenges because they exist in the game. I dislike them for how intrusive they felt to the normal gameplay loop of that game. Thus, in Serious Sam 4 here, I would have liked for the skill points to have been some sort of reward for things like killing all the enemies in a level, or finding 50% of the secrets, or something that most Serious Sam players are going to do anyway, but don't need to. I think having the skill points be rewarded in this way would have motivated players more to partake in the optional content. Speaking of optional content, secrets of course return in Serious Sam 4. There are also side missions, which are a pretty new idea for the franchise. Basically, as you'll be following the main path of each mission, a side fork path will pop up with a clear indicator telling you where the side mission is and what you can expect the reward to be. These are basically an excuse for players to give themselves an extra challenge in order to get some sweet goodies. Again, this will undoubtedly be something divisive amongst fans, but personally I enjoy these wholeheartedly. You get some great fights and equipment out of these, as well as neat side stories. While we're on the subject of stories, Serious Sam 4 has a story to it. Of course, story is not something new to Serious Sam. All of the Serious Sams up to this point have had simplistic stories of Sam chasing some sort of artifact or objective until he reaches the end of the game. In this respect, Serious Sam 4 differs from its predecessors. The story as a whole revolves around Sam and his military team of misfits, going around Italy, France, and even a bit of Russia to find the Ark of the Covenant, which holds the Holy Grail, which can be used to fight against the series' antagonist, Mental. It's an adventure like any other, but unlike previous Sam games, 4 has a whole cast of characters to add some camaraderie to the mix, as well as twists and even an antagonist this time around. Overall, I found the story to be pretty neat, fitting the Serious Sam franchise pretty well, but I'd be hard-pressed to say Crow Team stuck the landing with this. There are several things that I think could have been done better, or could have been done without. Like, for example, the antagonist, Lord Akraman. Serious Sam has never had an antagonist quite like this before that interacts and teases Sam, as for the most part in the previous stories of the franchise, they revolved around Sam really going against a force of God, surviving alone against an indeterminable and seemingly unstoppable power. Thus, I don't think Akraman fits very well here, if at all, nor do I think he's all that compelling or unique. I think it's clear Crow Team didn't really know how to handle him, as Sam doesn't even try to harm Akraman in these cutscenes, and the two are always apart with distance between them, mostly trying to trade lines against each other in a very awkward and stiff way. Another way I think the narrative portion of Serious Sam 4 falls flat is through its characters. Coming off Serious Sam 3, I think fans would have been most excited to see the fleshing out of characters like Hellfire, Quinn, and Rodriguez, but you only really spend time with one of them, and it's the one relegated to cannon fodder in the first moments of BFE. Serious Sam 4 tries to juggle this ensemble cast of different personalities, but some of them just fall by the wayside, while others aren't really given any purpose other than to act like an archetype. I also didn't like how most of their designs were supremely lackluster. A lot of your allies look super generic. I know Crow Team can do better than this, as they redesigned a bulk of the series' common enemies to look the best they've ever been. Meanwhile, a character like Rodriguez has these interesting backstory tidbits about him, like being a wrestler, or how his nickname is the Ram, yet all that amounts to visually is that he's the bald, loud guy with a beret. It's like this for all of the characters that aren't Sam. Hellfire, Carter, Jones, Brand, all have interesting written out backstories in Natriska, which, by the way, is back to her classic format thankfully, that don't come through visually. Plus, some of the model fidelity of these human characters in the game is not very great, especially Quinn, who almost looks unfinished with how fake and plasticky she looks. My final criticism I have for Serious Sam 4's story is that while the voice acting and dialogue writing is mostly fine in my opinion, I think Sam gets the brunt of the poor quality of this department. Like, I don't know who thought it was a good idea for Sam to say military jargon, but this poor choice sticks out like a sore thumb. Also, I think John J. Dick isn't doing everything in his power to make Sam sound emotive. There are points where Sam should be forlorn or excited, but Dick just provides the same voice delivery regardless of the situation. But, despite everything I just said about the story, and it does seem like a lot, I would like to leave this point off saying that I did end up enjoying the story more than I disliked it. I especially like how it's used to work with combat AI. That doesn't make Serious Sam any easier or harder. The AI helpers are very naturally implemented here in a way that makes me very happy. Of course, a Serious Sam game cannot be enjoyed without its cast of wacky, out there, iconic alien enemies. Most are returning mental hordes like the Syrians, the Clear, and the Nars, and as stated earlier, a lot of them get a fantastic redesign that see a return to the more saturated origins of the franchise. But in addition to the already varied cast of aliens, Croteam pack an impressive amount of new enemy types into Serious Sam 4. Seriously, there are so many enemy types within the game that Croteam is always able to keep you on your toes at a moment's notice. Some of my favorite newer additions have to be the vampires, the flying drones, the flamethrowing guys, and the Halo 2 Jackal-esque commandos. All can be exploded into some really satisfying looking jibbing. Each enemy also has a weak point now as well, which I like, especially for the wereabouls, which can be killed with one double shotgun shot that's timed and aimed perfectly. I also like the choice to get rid of the restrictive way you had to kill Coombs and Technopolyps in Serious Sam 3. Now these enemies can be killed like any other. Finally, I was surprised at the health bars that appear above enemies as you aim over them. It's quite a bold choice to change the way enemy health could be gauged at a glance in the previous games, and I think the risk pays off. I think this is a very clear signifier. Still, you can change back to the more classic way of a colored reticle, but you can't switch to the classic reticle, which is a little disappointing, so the experience of going back to the classic Serious Sam can't be one-to-one. Serious Sam 4 also has a great flow to it. Most of the stages here are very engaging. You get some great modern European looking environments that give a real City 17 vibe at times, and I was super impressed by the size of these. These are some of the biggest arenas in Serious Sam, and my jaw just dropped at how expansive and beautiful they are. All of course are scored by yet another wonderful soundtrack by Damian Maravanak, though I do have some criticisms for some of the stages here, mostly that these maps are so big that at times they can feel very empty. I wish Croteam spread some more armor, health, or items around to motivate the player to explore more. There were often times where I would get to somewhere that would have been a secret area in a previous Serious Sam game, but in 4, I was rewarded with nothing. I also thought there were some weak moments in the campaign, like the mech sections or the Combine Harvester section, which I didn't find all that appealing. And I think the level that comes the closest to being a dud in Serious Sam 4 is the oil rig level, which sees Croteam trying to pull off some tense horror, but ends up falling flat, especially since this oil rig setting doesn't fit the rest of the franchise's fascination with settings based off real-world locations. Finally, I guess the last criticism I have for Serious Sam 4 is things I've definitely seen others report as well. Jank, texture pop-in, inconsistent performance, long loading screens, bugs, glitches, weird color issues, models not showing up. I've definitely experienced all these things at least once in my playthrough. I also thought the lighting in the game could look very flat at times. That being said, these things never hampered my experience with the game overall. Plus, I play PC games on a laptop, so some of these issues could be attributed to that. Overall, the game didn't crash, and nothing bugged out so hard that I couldn't progress. And when a bug did happen, it happened every once in a while, so really, I'm not totally bothered by the jank of Serious Sam 4. In fact, my conclusive feelings on Serious Sam 4 are largely positive ones. This is the action-packed, blood-pumping, exciting gameplay I've grown to love throughout the past 4 years, and I think newcomers and returning fans will feel the same way when they play it. With that, I'm going to give Serious Sam 4 a final score of a high 7 out of 10. The story definitely could have used some work, some things should have definitely been cut, one level is a dud in my opinion, and there is some technical jank that is very obvious, but I foresee Serious Sam 4 being looked upon as one of the series' best games that it has to offer. Seriously. That concludes my review of Serious Sam 4. If you like my reviews, you can like, comment, or subscribe. I also have social media links down in the description below, as well as a link to my online portfolio, where you can see video game design works that I have done. I also have a link to my Backloggd profile, where you can see my scores at a glance. And with that out of the way, please make sure to have a nice day.